thought it was over when you stopped speaking. That when you didn't flinch, didn't scream, didn't fight back, they had won. That your silence was the sound of surrender. But they never realized what stillness really meant. Stillness isn't the absence of strength, it's the concentration of it. They saw a calm surface, but beneath it, a storm was forming. A storm that doesn't rage for attention. It waits to destroy with precision. You weren't retreating, you were collecting. Every insult, every betrayal, every fake smile that masked a knife. You gathered them all, tucked them into your spine, and stood a little straighter with each wound. They didn't hear you coming because you made no sound. They thought silence meant submission. That's only true for the weak. You weren't breaking, you were calculating. Patience isn't passive, it's surgical. You chose not to react, because reaction is for the impulsive. And you are no longer desperate to prove your worth to people too blind to see it. Let them misread you. Let them think they've won. That's where your advantage lives. Because you've learned, noise fades, silence lingers. You don't need to raise your voice to shake a room. You just need to walk back in differently. And you will. Not with rage, but with presence. Not with vengeance, but with a power they can't define and can't undo. This is where it begins. The part they never expected. The part where you stop explaining your pain and start letting your absence speak for itself. Because the most dangerous move is the one they never see coming. You didn't ask for the fire, but they gave it to you anyway. With every lie they wrapped in a smile. With every time they looked you in the eye and twisted the knife deeper. With every moment they walked away like you were nothing. They lit something beneath your skin. Not a fire of rage, not a fire of chaos, but a steady, growing heat. One that didn't burn wild, transformed. See, betrayal isn't just pain, it's alchemy. It turns flesh to armor, trust to instinct, and emotion into weaponry. They thought they were cracking you. What they didn't realize is that you were never made of glass. You were iron, buried deep, just waiting for the heat. And they gave it to you. Their betrayal didn't end you. It began the version of you that no longer begs, no longer chases, no longer apologizes for standing alone. Because you learned the hard way. Being broken by people who never intended to understand you is the greatest education pain could offer. You started watching differently, breathing differently, thinking differently. Your innocence didn't survive, but something far more dangerous was born in its place. Something ruthless, something aware. Something that remembers everything. They think you're cold now. They don't know that warmth was stolen from you when they left you bleeding in the dark. And in that dark, you didn't just survive. You rebuilt by touch, by instinct, by sheer refusal to let their betrayal be the final word in your story. That's what they don't get. They thought the silence meant you had nothing left. But inside, you were rearranging the wreckage. Stacking the pain like bricks. Stacking the tears like fuel. You were constructing something out of everything they tried to reduce. The moment you stopped trying to be understood, you became untouchable. And yes, there were nights that hollowed you out, mornings that hurt just to wake up in. People who didn't stay long enough to notice you were drowning. But every time you wanted to scream, you chose silence. And that silence didn't make you empty. It made you precise. They took your kindness and called it weakness. They saw your loyalty as naivety. When they turned their backs, they assumed you'd fall apart quietly. But pain is a liar. It doesn't just hurt. It teaches. And what you learned, you'll never forget. You learned to not chase, to not explain, to not pour into cups that only drain you. You learned to stay still, to observe, to collect patterns, not promises. They made you the villain in their stories to justify the way they left. But you're not the villain. You're the survivor of a battlefield they created. You're what happens when the weapon refuses to shatter. You were forged in their fire, but you were never consumed by it. You walked out with your scars, your silence, and your spine unbroken. And now they don't recognize you, because the version of you they betrayed is dead. And the one that rose doesn't ask for closure, doesn't beg for validation, doesn't need to be loud to be felt. You don't need their apology. Their guilt is louder. You don't need revenge. Your existence is the punishment. Because every time they see you breathing, building, and becoming without them, they feel the fire they lit. But now, it burns them. And you just keep walking. They wanted you loud. They wanted you broken and dramatic. Screaming into the void, begging for answers, flailing for attention. Because that's how they measure power. Who shouts the loudest, who reacts the fastest, who crumbles first. But you didn't give them that. You gave them silence. And that silence, it was not peace, it was preparation. While they turned your name into gossip, you turned your pain into bricks. While they scattered chaos like confetti, you were laying the foundation, stone by stone, underground. Quiet, focused, cold. This wasn't retreat. This was war, just not the kind they expected. Because you learned something they never could. The strongest move is the one no one sees coming. You weren't sleeping. You were studying. Every betrayal, every lie, every fake apology wrapped in poison. You didn't react because you were learning how they moved. And that's what makes you dangerous now. They fought for noise. You built for silence. They craved attention. You crafted intention. They wanted a fight. You built a kingdom. They moved emotionally. You moved strategically. While they talked, you worked. While they posted, you plotted. While they spun their narrative, you rewrote your future. You see, revenge doesn't always come with fire and fury. Sometimes it comes dressed in indifference. Sometimes it looks like peace. But underneath, it's surgical, ruthless, cold. They told people you disappeared. They said you lost. They said you fell off. Let them. Because while they were watching your absence, you were engineering your presence. You didn't waste your breath proving them wrong. You used it to build lungs strong enough to breathe in rooms they'd never be allowed to enter. They needed validation. You built value. You created noise. You created structure. There's power in refusing to be baited. There's dominance in letting the storm pass while you sharpen your weapons behind the curtain. You didn't react because you didn't need to. You were already becoming the one thing they never thought you'd be. Untouchable. And now your silence has weight. Now your presence has gravity. Now they speak your name with caution, because they know they can't reach you anymore. You didn't win the war by fighting louder. You won it by disappearing into discipline. And when you return, it won't be to argue. It won't be to explain. It'll be to take everything they swore you'd never earn, without asking, without warning. Because this wasn't their game. This was your empire. And you built it in the dark, brick by brick, alone, unshaken, and unannounced. They thought they finished you, left you bleeding, breath shallow, faith cracked open. They stepped over your silence like it was a grave. But they didn't bury you. They planted you. And what they planted didn't bloom soft. You didn't rise gentle, didn't stretch toward the light with petals. You grew with thorns, sharp, guarded, ready to slice anything that came close without purpose. Because when pain is all you're given, you don't grow pretty. You grow precise. They abandoned you when you needed them most, watched you suffer, then called it your fault. Spoke your name like it was a stain. Erased the parts of the story where they bled you dry, and kept only the chapters where you crawled alone. But you didn't stay broken. You didn't stay there. You used the cold. You used the silence. You let the soil choke you until your lungs learned how to breathe underground. And slowly, quietly, you built roots strong enough to crack through stone. That's what they don't see. They think healing is loud. They think survival looks like motivation posters and speeches. But real growth, it's ugly, it's painful, it's alone. It's silent mornings with blood in your throat and no one asking if you're okay. It's learning to protect yourself without hardening your soul. It's becoming dangerous, not out of revenge, but because safety now wears your face. They never thought you'd make it. They expected a collapse. They expected you to rot in the spot they left you. But instead, you rooted, you rose, and you kept rising, not to be seen, but to be unshakable. You didn't grow just to glow. You grew to protect what's left of you. Because now you know, pain doesn't ask for permission. Trust is currency you no longer hand out freely. You don't reach for people anymore. You don't beg to be chosen. You've learned that anyone who walks away while you're bleeding is already holding the knife. So you built your garden with walls. You learned how to bloom without applause. You stopped apologizing for becoming sharp, because being soft almost killed you. And if they try to come back, if they dare to step close again, they'll meet the thorns. They'll feel what they helped grow. Because what they tried to bury became the very thing they can't kill. And now you grow on your own terms, rooted in truth, watered by pain, and laced with a silence they'll never be able to read again. They never feared your patience, because they were too addicted to noise to understand it. They thought power meant screaming, reacting, posting, proving, explaining. But you didn't move like that. You didn't rush to defend yourself. You didn't beg for clarity. You didn't strike back when they gave you the perfect opening. And that's what made you dangerous. Because they didn't realize what patience really is. It's not softness, it's control. It's the discipline to sit in your own fire without screaming. The restraint to not swing back, even when you know exactly where to hit. It's watching someone dig their own grave and choosing not to stop them. You weren't avoiding the war. You were choosing when to show up. While they chased validation, you studied patterns. While they vented their poison into the air, you purified your purpose. While they mistook chaos for control, you were perfecting precision. You didn't just hold your tongue, you sharpened it. And now they're starting to feel it. See, loud people are easy to predict, easy to break, easy to trap in their own noise. But someone who's quiet, someone who watches instead of reacts, that's the one you should never cross. Because they won't fight fair, they'll fight final. You never wanted to destroy anyone, but you stopped feeling bad for becoming the consequence. They took your stillness as weakness. They saw you sitting in silence and assumed you were broken. But that stillness, that was where your patience became power. That was where your storm gathered. And now the air is shifting. They feel it. The same silence they mocked. It's echoing now. It's loud without a sound. That's what happens when you don't react. You become unreadable, untouchable. They don't know what version of you they'll meet anymore. Because you stopped showing your hands before the game began. You let them underestimate you. On purpose. Because what's more satisfying than watching someone run their mouth while you build a crown with the same stones they threw? And no, this wasn't peace. This was war in its purest form. Mental, strategic, calculated. Because the most powerful person in the room isn't the loudest. It's the one who knows exactly when to strike and chooses not to. That's the power they never understood. Your silence wasn't surrender. It was structure. It was the scaffolding of something bigger, something colder, something they can't touch now, no matter how loud they scream. Because now you've become the quiet they fear. The one who walks in with nothing to prove and everything to claim. You never needed revenge. You needed space, time, discipline. So let your silence rot in their memory and wrap itself around their shame. They were never ready for who you'd become. Because people who rely on chaos can't survive in the presence of someone who moves with intent. You didn't just win. You became the lesson. And your patience, that was the weapon they never saw coming. They thought they'd never see you again. Not like this. They thought the last time they saw you was the final chapter. Torn down, quiet, defeated. They thought they buried you in that moment. But you don't bury what isn't dead. And you don't erase what refuses to be forgotten. You didn't come back for them. You didn't return to prove you were still breathing. You returned because you no longer cared who was watching. And that's what shook them. You didn't walk in like a victim. You didn't flinch. You didn't beg to be seen. You just showed up, stronger, colder, unreachable. No explanations, no warnings, just presence. Because when you evolve in silence, your return doesn't need fanfare. It speaks for itself. They expected rage, expected fireworks, expected you to spit the pain back in their faces. But you weren't there to perform. You were there to exist, fully, unapologetically. And that's what broke them. Because people expect screams. They expect explosions. They expect the ones they destroy to crumble or retaliate. But when you walk back in with nothing but calm, that calm is terrifying. It means they don't affect you anymore. It means the war is over, and you won without even firing a shot. They whispered about you in your absence, mocked you, doubted you, rewrote the story to make themselves look clean. But the moment they saw you again, the story rewrote itself. No words, no revenge, just you, standing, breathing, owning every scar like armor they never expected to see again. And suddenly, they remembered everything. Every betrayal, every silence, every time they turned their back thinking you wouldn't survive it. But you didn't just survive. You became something unrecognizable. You grew into a version of yourself that didn't need validation, didn't need justice, didn't need noise. You don't wear your pain like a badge anymore. You wear it like a crown, and every glance they throw your way now is laced with fear they'll never admit. Because there's nothing more haunting than someone who should have been broken, walking like nothing touched them. You didn't scream. You didn't call them out. You didn't demand apologies they were never strong enough to give. You just kept walking. And that silence, that's what echoed louder than any revenge ever could. They expected your comeback to be a performance. Instead, it was a reminder. A reminder that you never needed to match their chaos. You just needed to outgrow it. And now you have. You didn't return to make a statement. You are the statement. You are the aftermath. The storm they laughed at when it was still just clouds. But now it's here, not to destroy, but to remind that you didn't break, you rebuilt, that your silence was never absence, it was strategy, that your patience was never weakness, it was war in waiting. And now they look at you, realize they never understood who you were, but it's too late. Because you're no longer in the room to be understood. You're in the room to be remembered. Now the silence haunts them. The same silence they used to mock. The same stillness they once saw as weakness now surrounds them like a noose. Because it's not your hands that haunt them. It's what they see every time they close their eyes. You. Not the broken version they left behind. Not the one they thought would never recover. No. What they see now is the version of you they never believed could exist. The one they didn't plan for. The one they can't reach anymore. And it eats them alive. They walk around with smiles stitched over guilt. They play strong, play clean, play loud. But beneath the surface, they're rotting. Because guilt doesn't scream, it whispers. Over and over in the quiet. And your name is all it says. They see your growth and can't celebrate it. Because they know what they did to bury it. They know they were the storm you survived. And survival, that kind of survival, doesn't just reflect strength. It reflects their failure. They didn't just betray you, they underestimated you. They bet on your collapse, and they lost. Now your name stings, not because you retaliated, but because you didn't have to. You didn't smear them, didn't expose them, didn't run a campaign to prove your innocence. You just became undeniable. And that's what broke them. Because guilt isn't loud like anger. It's quiet like shame. It festers in silence, where the truth has nowhere to hide. You've become a walking mirror. And every time they see you, every time they hear your name, every time your success echoes into spaces they thought you'd never touch, they're forced to face who they were, what they did, what they threw away, who they failed to break. And that's the worst part for them, knowing they were the author of your suffering. But you were the architect of your rise. They built their identity on the belief that you'd never outgrow the pain. But now they're the ones stuck in it. Because you didn't just survive, you transcended. You rose so far past them, they can't even reach you with lies anymore. They can't stain your name, can't rewrite the story, can't control the narrative. Because you outgrew the battlefield while they kept swinging at ghosts. And now they live with the truth that your silence was never surrender. It was a mirror. And now they're trapped in the reflection of their own choices. They see you walking in power, and every step you take without them feels like thunder. Because you didn't ruin them. You just walked away. And that silence, the one they never respected, it became the loudest judgment. No revenge, no reckoning, no fury, just distance, just evolution, just proof. You became everything they swore you couldn't. And they became exactly what they feared, forgotten. They talk about you now like a ghost story, quietly, carefully. Because even your name has weight. And not because of vengeance, but because of regret. You are the consequence they'll never stop reliving, and they'll never admit it. But that's okay, because guilt doesn't need confession, it just needs time. And time has been generous to you, but cruel to them. They thought they were getting away with it. That their betrayal would wash away with time. That you'd move on, quietly broken. They'd never have to face what they did. But here you are, not with vengeance, not with rage, not with a list of receipts, or a voice screaming for justice. You came back different, colder, sharper, still. And now your existence does what revenge never could. It reminds them that there are some people you can't break without consequences. And some consequences don't come in the form of violence. They come as a presence, unshakable, unbothered, unreachable. You became that presence. You didn't just survive what they did. You absorbed it. You let it sink into your skin like ice. And then you learned how to breathe inside the cold. That's why they fear you now. Not because you're cruel, but because you're clear. You see them for what they are. You remember everything they thought you'd forget. You feel nothing where there used to be empathy. And in that nothingness, you found freedom. You don't speak their language anymore. You don't play by their rules. You're no longer asking to be understood. Because when you rise past the damage, you stop seeking permission to exist. You are the permission. that's what makes you dangerous. Not the scars, not the silence, not the strength. It's the fact that you could have destroyed them, but didn't, because you didn't need to. You became something far more haunting. You became their awakening. Now every room you enter becomes a confession booth they didn't ask for. Every glance you cast is a sentence they can't escape. And every success you build, every win they said you'd never reach, feels like a verdict. You don't speak their names. You don't bring them up. But your glow, your discipline, your detachment, it burns them. Because guilt needs two things to survive: distance and denial. You gave them neither. You gave them distance, but not disappearance. You gave them silence, but not peace. You let your evolution speak louder than any confrontation ever could. And now, no matter how far they run, they're always looking over their shoulder. Wondering how you got so far ahead. Wondering why their name tastes bitter when they hear yours. It's not fear of you. It's fear of themselves, reflected through the version of you they never saw coming. The version that doesn't beg, doesn't explain, doesn't engage. Just is. You've become what they warned others about. Could never control themselves. You've become proof. Proof that pain can refine. Proof that silence can speak. Proof that the ones left for dead come back different. Not broken, but beyond reach. You're not their lesson. You're their consequence. Their slow burn. Their internal unraveling. And the cruelest part, you never even tried. You became everything they tried to prevent. By being everything they weren't prepared to face. You didn't survive their betrayal. You used it. You crafted it into a weapon that never needed to strike. Because now, you are the strike. They wake up with your name in their mouth and shame in their throat. Because you rose in silence. And in that silence, you became untouchable. You weren't the victim. You were the mirror. The one they avoided. The one they now can't unsee. And the reflection, it isn't kind. It's exact. It's sharp. It's final. Because you didn't just evolve. You became the standard. And they'll never meet it. You didn't have to slam the door. You didn't need to scream. You didn't owe them fire. All you had to do was disappear. And that silence, it did what revenge never could. Because sometimes the cruelest thing you can do to someone who expected chaos is give them nothing. No response, no breakdown, no war, just distance. Cold, controlled, complete. They kept waiting for the explosion. They built themselves up to survive the backlash. But you never came back to burn it down. You just walked away. And that absence, that's what scorched them. Because now, they're haunted not by what you did, but by what you didn't. You didn't chase them for closure, didn't correct the lies, didn't claw your way back to prove your worth. You vanished on your terms. And in that vanishing, you left behind something heavier than punishment. Silence that speaks. It's in the way your name no longer carries pain. It's in the way your presence is no longer accessible. It's in the way they scroll and see you thriving, without a trace of them left in your orbit. And it kills them. Because they thought you would always need them. They thought they mattered more than they did. thought they had power over your path. But now, every day they don't hear from you. Every day they see you moving in spaces they can't enter. Is a reminder that they were never as necessary as they believed. You made peace with the wound, but they're still bleeding from your absence. They replay it. The messages unanswered. The events you never showed up to. The silence after every attempt to pull you back into their web. And the worst part, you're not angry, you're indifferent. Because that's the power they never understood. It's not in revenge, it's in refusal. Refusal to engage. Refusal to explain. Refusal to validate a betrayal that should have never existed. Your absence became sacred. A line they can't cross. A wall they can't climb. Not because you built it out of spite. Because they no longer matter enough to deserve access. You didn't block them. You erased them. Not out of hate. Out of healing. And that's the kind of silence they can't recover from. Because it forces them to sit with everything they did. Without distraction. Without justification. Without you. They thought they had time. Thought maybe you'd circle back. That at some point, you'd miss them more than you remembered the pain. But time kept moving, and you kept growing. And they stayed behind, watching the version of you they swore would fall. Rise without them. You became unreachable. And not because you went higher, but because you went wiser. You know better now. You know who drains you. You know what it costs to keep giving to people who never deserved your presence. So now you protect your peace like a fortress. Now your absence isn't just silence, it's a sentence. One they serve alone, day after day. Because there's no scream louder than the one that echoes when you realize destroyed something too good to rebuild, and it'll never knock on your door again. You became a ghost in their memory, not because you died, but because you evolved into someone who doesn't look back. And no revenge could ever be more painful than the realization that they're nothing more than a name you chose not to say again. They thought it was nothing. A moment of selfishness, a decision made in the heat, a betrayal they convinced themselves was justified. It cost them nothing in the moment. No thought, no remorse, no hesitation. They threw you aside like your loyalty had an expiration date. But the thing about betrayal, it's cheap for the one who deals it. Crippling for the one who lives with its echo. Because you paid in silence, in restraint, in nights no one saw, with fists clenched and a throat full of words you refused to speak. You waited, not for revenge, but for the moment. Time would deliver what you never had to touch with your own hands. Consequence. And now, it's collecting. You didn't scream. You didn't fight. You just kept your distance and built a version of yourself that doesn't flinch anymore. A version that lives so far above them, they choke on the altitude. That's the price they never saw coming. Not your rage, not your wrath, but your absence, your evolution. Your success without them in the frame. Your peace that no longer has room for their chaos. They traded your presence for convenience. But now, even if they begged, you wouldn't offer a whisper. Because their mistake was thinking they ended something. What they really did was begin the longest sentence they'll ever serve. Not in prison, in memory. You won't be the story they brag about. You'll be the shadow that follows every fake smile. The reminder that they had something solid and traded it for something hollow. They betrayed you for free. But you made them pay with forever. They thought they were clever. Thought they could play with fire and walk away untouched. But they didn't know. You were the fire. All they did was hand you the match. They thought your patience was hesitation, that your stillness was confusion, that your silence meant fear. But in reality, you were standing there, holding that flame, watching, waiting, knowing exactly what it would take to burn it all down if you had to. They should have feared the version of you that didn't respond, the version that didn't fight back immediately. Because that version was building something darker, something colder, something permanent. You didn't need to destroy them. You became something they couldn't survive. And now, every time they breathe, they inhale the smoke of the bridges they set on fire. Not realizing you were the one who lit the match they gave you. Controlled destruction. That's what your patience was. Not passivity, not surrender, but the slow, deliberate preparation for a silence that would swallow them whole. They thought you'd break, but now they're the ones crawling. Gasping for breath in the aftermath of a storm they thought they started. But you finished, because you don't need to shout to be lethal. You don't need to chase anyone to become unforgettable. You don't need to explain a thing. You are the explanation. You were never the victim. You were the reckoning. And now, let this fire spread. Let it reach the ones who feel silenced, the ones who were broken, the ones who were left behind and made to feel weak for not reacting. Send this to them. Let it burn into their spine. Let it remind them. You don't need to make noise to make history. Like, share, subscribe, and hit that damn bell icon. Because the world is full of noise. But here, we don't whisper. We burn. This is the fire they never survived. This is your rise, and it's just getting started. Welcome to the aftermath.